Hello, and welcome back. So previously we've talked about PDL. PDL is a query language that will allow us to search through text data and identify important pieces of information. And we can just use these as basic queries, or we can add structure to these to classify and organize our text. So now we are going to move on and talk about XPDL. So what is XPDL? So PDL stands for Pattern Definition Language, and XPDL is just going to be an expanded version of PDL. So you don't need to worry about learning an entirely new language. Everything you learned about PDL is going to be applicable to XPDL. XPDL is PDL, it just has some additional features to that. Where in PolyAnalyst do we actually use XPDL? We use XPDL primarily in the entity extraction node, and we also use that in the fact extraction and the sentiment analysis nodes. Now, fact extraction and sentiment analysis nodes are really just entity extraction nodes with a few additional features added to them, and they have a few different kind of built-in systems that you don't need to worry about. Like I said, XPDL and PDL are very similar. XPDL just has some additional features. This means XPDL can share the same dictionaries that we've created for use in PDL. So all the word classes, for example, that we've created before, we can continue to use these in XPDL. We can also use the variables and macros we've also created. Those can be recycled, and we don't have to worry about creating new containers for our XPDL stuff. So what is the difference between PDL and XPDL? PDL, as we've said, can categorize records. They are queries that search through text and can identify certain text records that identify or that are hit by those queries. Those queries have run on and actually found a match on, so we can identify entire documents as matching a query. XPDL looks through text and runs queries. It can actually extract the text itself that matched the query and pull that out of the text into a new column, so it can perform extraction. It can also save and remember that text and can run additional queries using that saved information. This ability to remember the text itself, where that text was that matched the query, and then recycle that information to do additional queries, is something PDL cannot do on its own. You need to use XPDL for this. The idea behind XPDL is to look for what we call entities. So you can think of entities as abstract concepts that have different instances in existence in our text. So for example, people. People, that's kind of an abstract concept, but then there are going to be specific people in our text. So John Doe is an instance of a person. That is a people entity. Or Jane Smith, that's another instance of the people entity. They all share similar characteristics. In this case, they have a first name and a last name. They might have attributes, such as an age or a gender. They're all part of the same sort of group, people. And we could say similar things about companies, email addresses, phone numbers, etc. These are all things that have similar characteristics. They're all kind of bundled together in one sort of class. They have different instances of this class in our text, and we like to find all these instances by looking for some sort of pattern. That pattern is the entity. So now that we have this kind of concept in mind, how do we actually create XPDL? How do we actually write this with syntax? What's the difference between PDL and XPDL in that sense? So the first idea that we need to really understand is named groups. This is something that PDL does not have, and we're introducing that for XPDL. So like I said previously, XPDL has the ability to run queries that can extract text or save it to remember it and to use it in future queries. And that's handled by named groups. So you need to write a piece of PDL, and if you'd like to remember that piece of PDL or extract it, you need to provide it with a named group. And to do so, you just need to mark it with some curly brackets around the PDL query that you've written. And then you do colon and you provide a name. So curly bracket, you insert your PDL query, in curly bracket, colon, the name of your group. That's how you designate named groups. So for example, maybe we have a word class that we like to use, the subjects word class, and we like to extract this information later. We actually want to pull out which word we're using in this query. So we'll use the PDL sequence term subjects, and then we'll put that all in curly brackets and call that named group. Or we could just spell out some longer PDL here if we're looking for an adjective followed by a noun. We'll put curly brackets around all of that and call that our phrase. Or if we only care about the noun, we don't really care about the entire thing. We want to look for nouns that are preceded by adjectives. We don't care about the adjective itself, we just want that noun. We'll only put the curly brackets around the lemma noun part and call that the noun named group. So the named group doesn't need to be over the entirety of our PDL. It can be over a piece of the PDL. But when we create named groups, we need to make sure we're doing them properly. PDL queries must, the PDL queries that we're putting into our named groups must be by themselves an entirely valid PDL expression. So, for example here, phrase replace the lemma noun. If we try to put a named group around the comma lemma noun, we're going to get a syntax error, because the comma lemma noun by itself is not a valid PDL expression. We could do it around the by itself, or lemma noun by itself, or the entire phrase replace the lemma noun, but the comma lemma noun is not a valid PDL expression by itself. So we can't call that, we can't use a named group around that. So now that we understand named groups, let's take a look at some general XPDL syntax. XPDL is a rule-based system. So in PDL, we just typed up a query and submitted that query. XPDL has a few additional layers. The first layer is the rule layer, to establish a rule. And to do so, you just type rule colon and you provide the name for that rule. So for example, we can just call this test underscore rule. The next thing you want to do is open a set of curly braces. This is going to contain all of the contents of that rule. And these braces are just a wrapper. Next, we'd like to provide a query to look for. So we can just use the PDL that we already know. To do so, we'll type query colon, and then we can type in a full PDL query. And in this case, we've actually went ahead and applied some name groups to this PDL. So we have the entire phrase called group, the adjective called adjective, and the noun called noun. Now we have our PDL query established. The next thing we want to do is provide a result block. So a result block is going to be designated by result colon, and then you give a name of whatever you'd like to return. So if I'm extracting this as a new column, that new column will be called a match. the contents will be whatever is matching my named group. So you see here I actually reference the named group. I'm returning that named group here with match. So in our result block, we can use these named groups to designate what we are returning. To do so, we use $ and then the name of the named group that we care about. So this result block at the top is going to be doing the entire thing, the entire phrase as we returned as a match. We also have attributes. Attributes are going to be additional pieces of information that are tied to this extraction. So if we're extracting this as a separate, as like new columns in our data, we would have one column called match, and then we would have two columns for our attributes, one called adjective and one called noun. And the contents of these additional columns would be decided by those name groups that we have here. So we have $ adjective and $ noun, so we're referring to the adjective and noun named groups that are going to be inside of our group, named group. And this is the basic syntax of XPDL. We define our rule, we have a query block, and then we have a result block that's going to determine what we're actually returning or extracting from the text. Let's take a look at XPDL rules inside of PolyAnalyst. We are again working on the comment card data, the hotel review data. So instead of using a general query, let's construct some XPDL. To do that, I'll use an entity extraction node, and then I'll open up the properties. So we'll see a list of standard entities. So things like people, host addresses, currencies, and units. These are things that are already built into PolyAnalyst. So if they're checked, this sort of entity, for people, for example, will automatically be searched for by PolyAnalyst and will have an output called people. But if we don't care about these standard entities, we'd like to create our own custom entity, we can uncheck these all of these, then minimize these, and then create our own. So we'll add a new entry. So I'll call this example. And then if I like to edit this, I'll simply double click. And now we have a rule editor menu or kind of interface here. So what we have here is a few different things, and I'll make this a little bit smaller. So we have first the interface where we'll put all of the XPDL, and when you create a new one, it will be auto-populated with this example rule, similar to the one we just talked about. We'll also have a few different things. On the right-hand side, we'll have a rules explorer. So if we have multiple rules, we'll see them populated here. Later in subsequent videos, we'll talk about child rules and how we can have nested rules, similar to how we have these nested taxonomy structures. And you can see them organized in this structure here. We have the standard array of such a PDL kind of tools like our macros and variables button, our dictionary selector button. But we also have access to a test panel at the bottom. This will allow us to type in some text, like red book, and then we can run our XPDL on this text, and then we can see the results in the right-hand side. So in this case, we're looking for adjectives followed by a noun. So I typed in red book, ran this query on it. The results will be a name of the rule that I used, so this is R1. The match that we had provided, so that would be the entire thing, red book. And then we have a component, we have this attribute called adjective that we included. So that will be the output of our XPDL here. So let me just run this and I'll show you what the output might look like. So before we move on to kind of creating our own custom rule. To view the output, simply execute, and then we can double-click again. And then we'll be provided with a table of all the extractions. So we can see the match, and then the adjective attribute that was a part of that. And then we can sort these by the support if we'd like to see very common examples. So friendly staff was the most common combination of an adjective and a noun. If we'd like to see these in the text, we can navigate to the text panel and then look at the text. In each text we can see the highlighted examples of this, and then if we hover over, we can or click, we can see that the adjective bigger than match, bigger waist, all these attributes will be included as an explanation of the entity. So what do we do with this? If we like to use this in analysis, we can export this, so we can generate a new data set. Once that's been generated, it'll be connected to our entity. And then to view this, we simply have an output that's very similar to that table we saw. So for each piece of text, we'll see all the matches and adjectives that were created from that. And then we can use this for classification or extracting important pieces of information from the text in our further analysis. So what if we want to create our own custom entity? Well, I can go back to the properties either by right-clicking and selecting properties, or in the view of the node, at the very bottom I have a properties tab. And I can navigate to here for that. My personal preference is always to go to the right-click and going to property, because I have a bit more room to work with. There we go. So what would I like to extract here? So if you are having difficulty remembering all the pieces of an XPDL rule, you can just use this framework that's auto-populated to organize your rules. So let's do that. Let's take this rule that's in existence and edit that to be something kind of closer to what we'd actually like to look for. So I'm going to wrap text so we can better see this. And then I'm going to just organize it a little bit more. I don't need this example comment, so I'm going to get rid of that and get rid of this. And then I'm going to just organize the query a little bit. I like to keep things a little bit more organized in this sense. I like to have my curly bracket for my named groups a little bit like this. So now I have my rule, my query, the actual main piece of PDL that's all wrapped in this thing. Okay, so now I'd like to change this. Well, the question is, what would we like to extract? So maybe let's take a look at the staff again. We took a look at the staff in previous videos. So let's keep an eye on the staff. So maybe they are talking to the staff, and we want to know things they can evaluate the staff as. So kind of adjectives we can apply to the staff. So they could say the staff was something that was, could, or could not be there. So I'll use the optional function. So this will mean if was is present, it'll allow it to capture, but if was is not present, that's fine. Just optional. And then I could do something that looks for adjectives. Maybe I want to look for something a little bit more complicated, so I can look for a kind of a series of adjectives. So I'll use the chunk function for this. So I'll use chunk pAdj. So if you're not familiar with the chunk function, you could just use part-of-speech adjective, for example. This will allow us to, the chunk function will allow us to get sort of phrases of adjectives, not just a single word. Okay, so looking for staff. Maybe I'd like to capture this adjective, though. And I'll call this A, and that way it'll be captured by this attribute adjective. All right. They could say this, or sometimes, since this is just shorthand, they could say phrase adjective staff, like friendly staff, for example. So I'm just going to copy this and paste it down here. And there we go. So this will be captured as at named group A, but this will also be captured by named group A if we see that as well. So we don't have to name these things differently. They can be the same named group. Okay. So I think I'm happy. Actually, let's change the name of the rule to staff. Okay. If I'm not sure if this is working properly, I can select check syntax, but it looks like everything's ready to go. So I'll hit OK, and then I'll execute. Now I can open up the entity extraction node and take a look at my results. So here we see things like staff, very friendly, friendly staff, very helpful, excellent, friendly, wonderful. So this particular type of XPDL rule allows us to find the evaluations of our staff. We can see all the different things people are saying about the staff with this very simple rule. Of course, we can use more advanced PDL functions, make the rule a bit more complicated. This is just a very basic example to show you. If you want to know what people are saying about the staff or about some sort of topic, you can look for that word in conjunction with adjectives or adjective phrases. And then we can export this and use this exported value as the classifier or an attribute of your text. So that is the introduction to XPDL, just starting off with creating rules. In the future, we'll take a look at some more advanced features of XPDL, how to create layers of rules for accurate extractions. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you again.